Hi, my name is Mason, and I'm a private restaurant consultant. This is the start of a series and a sister video to the financial tool demonstration that I posted on YouTube yesterday. Right off the bat, I have two apologies to make. One, I am recording this video in a very lively household, and I'm clearly not a professional YouTuber. So I hope that the conversation topic is interesting enough that you'll, give me some patience as I learn about and improve production quality. And second of all, this channel is not part of the YouTube Partners program, so apologies for any ads. Whenever I qualify for YPP, I will be demonetizing all videos, and this channel will never take any sponsors. So in relation to the financial tool that I demoed yesterday, which is available on my website, the topic of today's conversation is about forecasting and financial controls, basically kind of the philosophy around them. And when it comes down to it, people hear these terms like projections and forecasting, and there's thousands of resources available between the National Restaurant Association, which obviously don't endorse any of this or anything, but they're an integral asset for, I think, every restaurant operator, so they have to be involved in the conversation. And there's also, hundreds of books written by MBAs on what these mean and how to do them and everything. And, I think you wind up running into a lot of operators that question, like, why do projections? What is this? Like, what is this math I'm doing instead of working? Because there's no shortage of things to do in any restaurant, right? So right off the bat, to kind of define a projection, essentially it takes a look at the finances of, it could be any time scale, 6 months, a quarter, a period, a week, whatever. And it assumes what your things like guest count and sales are going to look like. Why is this important? Well, because, it's a pretty useful final step before committing dollars to any kinds of purchases, be that labor or product or whatever, right? And, a lot of times when people hear projection and they talk about modeling what the future looks like, you get a lot of operators that say, oh, okay, so you're telling me like it's a guess or it's wishful thinking. And, that's not incorrect. Where this essentially breaks down is that, yes, the spreadsheet can say anything, but the operations in the store and the kind of like some things that are out of your control, like the economic situation locally, globally, whatever, can drastically impact whether or not a projection is realistic or not, right? So when you look at something like needing 3 to 5% growth to beat or keep up with inflation, or opening a new revenue center and drawing in 20% more per year or per quarter, that's going to be directly tied to real things about your operation and how you're meeting customer needs and kind of tapping into the resources of the neighborhood, right? Another common criticism that I hear too is it's math and it doesn't help. I know I'm down, and I know I'm down, and I'm working on fixing it. What good is this spreadsheet going to do me? Well, this is actually a vital portion of financial control, because like I said, this is the final kind of strategic step that you're taking in looking at what money could very realistically look like, and we're only working with realistic forecasts. Don't hit me with the 30% growth or things that aren't going to happen, right? Is that you're down. Well, what are you changing about your habits? If your restaurant is down 10 or 12% and you're hemorrhaging money, are you changing your buying habits? Are you changing them proactively instead of retroactively? When the coffers are running dry and that your invoices are going to be due and you're ordering less, and what you're ordering less of, that's a reactive decision based on money in the bank. Meanwhile, if you're modeling 10 or 12% down in traffic and you're taking proactive steps to look at things like your product mix and your staffing before you're committing labor dollars, you're stopping the bleeding as opposed to continuing the bleeding. And one of the things that happens with financials and projections that challenges people a lot is historical data. Most restaurants are dying before 2 years. And then you look at some of the resources and tools available for essentially enterprise level restaurants that are multivariable, like regression analyses and all this stuff. And they're long videos and they're confusing and they're very Excel heavy. And frankly, they're overcomplicated for, I would say, the vast majority of restaurants. You might be in the position where you opened up or have a lease in a spot that never had any historical retail data, or they had some but it was incomplete and terrible, or As the example I used in my demo video, you are a cafe and you moved in and retrofitted a bookstore. Well, you know what people's spending habits were on books, but you have no idea what it's going to be like on coffee. Depending on how much due diligence you did before opening your cafe, right? Simultaneously, too, if you're in one of these spots that just doesn't have any historical data, or maybe your concept is popular enough and it's got enough community support that, your financial planning and these other tools really aren't working, then my financial demo tool kind of uses things like recency and velocity to make adjustments and change the scale of history to make operational changes. But the more important thing is that, a lot of businesses are just not sufficiently equipped with data to do a 10 or 12 point multivariable regression analysis. You need clean data and a wide variety of data. What are those variables in multivariable regression analysis like that? It's going to be whether or not you're advertising, where, what kind of specials you're running, what's the weather like, are there local events going on, is there construction or traffic on the street and in the nearby area, all of these things. So if you're not recording those right now in your sales log, in your sales calendar, then the equation doesn't do anything for you. Right? And it never will, because you need at least a year or two of solid data to get reasonable and smooth answers out of that kind of tool. One of the things that I like about doing projections week to week and even looking at your labor budget and calculating these totals strategically before entering into things like softwares for scheduling is that it gives you a real look at the numbers essentially that you're looking to grow into, looking to staff for. And it also gives you targets to give to your sales staff. One of the big missing portions in things like business development is everybody says, well, we want to grow. Well, we want to earn more money. And the unfortunate thing is that that's a desire. That's not really a goal. It doesn't translate very well to training. Go out there and make money. Well, everyone's doing that already. When you help your staff, when you point them in the direction of saying, we need to grow by 5%. Well, what does that look like? Okay, well, here's what it looks like. That means on Monday we're selling $300 extra. What are you helping us do to hit that $300 extra, put more money in your pocket, and then help us achieve different variables? Like, maybe if you're a small business that you want to provide your staff with healthcare. Well, that comes obviously at a cost, and somebody needs to pay for it, and that somebody is the owner-operator, right? And giving that information, giving those tools, giving those numbers in terms of concrete value makes it so that way servers can say, oh, okay, well, it's $300. I need to sell 20 sandwiches, or whatever the metric is going to be. It's going to be 5 steaks. Cool. And I think that helps a lot in terms of management and deployment. One of the reasons that I want to talk about forecasting and budgeting and financial controls and the philosophy behind this is because I operate predominantly out of Chicago. And let me tell you, wage concerns, I think, are pretty big in most markets. And I'm going to kid myself a little bit here to say, I don't want a big debate down in the comments section, right? Because probably no one will be debating this, but this video is not about minimum wage. It's not about eliminating tipping. It's not talking about any of that stuff, right? I not the time or place. A lot of controversial opinions on that. My point remains is that by increasing the minimum wage and the Chicago Unfair Wage Act, for example, right, as has seen done in other markets, right, does increase labor costs. It does increase training costs, which is already another huge problem for restaurants, right? I mean, turnover and training is a nightmare. And now, for example, in Chicago, you're paying a trainee like $16, which is, right, fine. We're not talking about the merits of that. We're talking about the realistic portion of it. If you're not in one of those markets, right, good for you, right? Your labor costs are lower and probably more routine, but they're going to grow, right? Nothing gets easier. This business always gets more expensive. And you have a really, really great crystal ball to see into the future in these other markets and say, like, okay, well, we hope it never hits 16 or 18 or 20 or whatever. Guys in California, I'm sure, are laughing. But what happens when it does? How do we adjust our business? How do we make staffing changes? How do we change our concept? How do we grow with the times, right? So wage concerns, for sure, I think, don't just affect one market. They don't just affect one, group. I think it's a great learning opportunity, among all of the other kinds of, involving factors to that conversation. So one big topic I'm going to interject here, and I'm going to be practicing some editing, splicing this up and moving it around. Sorry. AI forecasting, right? It's the elephant in the room. It's everywhere. Nobody will stop talking about this. Operators of all volume, scale, size, and type are interested in being involved in this. And I think AI forecasting is one of those things that segues really easily into this conversation where, like, the news media and whatever, take your pick of weekly periodical or business website publication that says, oh, look at bigrestaurant.copyright.tm that's in 300 countries, and they're using an AI software to determine how many burgers should be on the griddle at any point in time and reduce food waste and and it's killer for me that anybody is going to put their financial decisions and projections and all that other stuff into essentially this black box that's going to spit out solutions for you with essentially opaque reasoning. It kills me, right? The whole point of having something like your own in-house files or whatever system you already have, even if it might not be necessarily effective or formatted, is that you are in charge of making the decisions that have direct impact on your business. Doing these kinds of reports that I advocate, that I sell, right? Which obviously I'm biased, but it's your interpretation, it's your decision. You have great accessible tools on your POS that kind of average sales and talk about year over year and business trends and stuff. But I mean, point of sale company, competitive, financial tool arming, let's help the chef owner who doesn't have a business background. They're the ones that are now informing your business decisions. They're averaging things like sales and using big tech and all that stuff. It's not custom to your store. It's not based on the logic of your store. It's not based on your customers and your needs and the way that you run your program. So while I think these generalized tools do a great deal to help non-business, non-financial, non-technical people kind of dip their toes into the water, I don't think that you want to be steering a race car with two fingers, right? I mean, you need to get comfortable with some of the financials or have a partner who is comfortable. And I don't want to sound like I'm anti-tech, right? I'm certainly not. But you don't want opaque decisions in this arena, right? I mean, all of those numbers in the cells, all of those graphs, those are your dollars in your account, in your pocket, paying your employees, purchasing the food, right? There shouldn't be any disconnect between those two, or how those numbers get moved around and represented, because at the end of the day, it's money, it's your money, it's your investors' money. And in talking about projections and what that means and where this comes from and financial literacy for a field, a job that typically has a wide range of restaurant industry attracts a wide range of talent, backgrounds, and disciplines, right? My home market of Chicago has people with hydraulic engineering degrees, running breweries. And that's great because they're technically minded people. They love spreadsheets. They can do all kinds of great stuff. But obviously, they have different specialties. They have new skills that they have to learn to adapt and function and flourish in hospitality. And, what we really saw in terms of forecasting and financials going from the old mom and pop paper place and my CPA gives me the X and Y and I handwrite all my checks, right, is really the big turn came in around 2008 and post-2008. As baffling as it might be to us in the restaurant business, with the housing collapse, restaurants and hospitality became a very important cog in diversified portfolios. They represented real asset, real traffic, whatever was going on in the economy was still being reflected and impacted, directly on those stores. Like I said, they had real assets. You could turn around and sell ovens when virtual and synthetic things like stocks and bonds and derivatives weren't moving or hemorrhaging you money. You still had other things. On top of that, a couple of really fun concepts basically kind of proved themselves to be recession proof. Among those, I have like pizza and smash burgers, right? I mean, like the Oklahoma onion patty smash burger came out of the 1920s. I don't think you can really argue with the kind of like case study that, oh yeah, this is a depression food and it works and people will eat it. Tell me if I'm wrong, right? So with these guys in business, right, the bankers and everybody coming out of the woodwork at this point in time, pardon me, they brought with them, investor money. And with investor money comes investor speech. So they were talking about projections and tightened P&Ls and not just projections and beats and this and that and everything else, but they brought this whole additional language into the stratosphere of like barely organized offices, right? Like you're pretty much only as organized as you need to be to do things like pay taxes, check liquor invoices, and what have you. And not only were they looking at what's going on currently and what had happened historically at the restaurant, but they're saying like we want to guess at what's going to happen tomorrow and how we're going to change this, and brought really important ideas, right? Like you could say, for example, like, oh, if I was twice as busy tomorrow, I would be so happy, right? But you don't know for certain that necessarily your concept or your store or your restaurant actually like scales profitability based on high volume business like that, right? You have to make a slew of changes, and you can't always assume, right? Like, oh, double the business means just double the staff, right? Well, not quite. And that's what these guys are checking out. And they have investors asking questions like, well, what happens when the cash flow runs dry? We as restaurant operators, we already know that. What happens when the guests stop showing up? We've got no money, right? But the investors want to know for how long? Well, what can you recycle? Where's this coming from? All of that stuff. All right, so take a shot every time I've said historical data. Please don't please drink responsibly. The best question and one of the big criticisms that people will ask in terms of not just doing financials and projections as a small to medium business is like, why am I basing it off of history, right? It's like the stock market fallacy, like just because it happened before doesn't mean it happens again. And historical data, what does it mean? And what bearing does it really have on the future? I mean, frankly, the reason we use it is because it's the best we have. It represents something way more significant than some people give it credit for. Yeah, you might have sold, $3,000 on Monday in September of, last year. Who knows what you're going to do this year? Well, frankly, depending on the economy at large and everything else, that, sales figure represents money that was actually parted with by consumers to your business. You can't expect massive changes to occur in either direction without some kind of a reason, right? Like maybe your city has gone bankrupt or is going bankrupt. Maybe the neighborhood is gentrifying and you're losing your customer base, or you're gaining a new customer base, or the local small business association has an event, an affair going on to help support you. Those are kind of anomalies. But in terms of the grand movement of the business, you're going to change slowly. And, big things obviously are big disasters. They can damage and kill restaurants or help them grow substantially when you're prepared for them, or, whatever. The big thing is that the slow knife kills you slowly. When you're going down 3% versus inflation slowly over the course of a year or two, that's when you're 2 years later thinking to yourself, how did this happen, with empty pockets, or initiating your exit strategy. And, this is kind of how this works. So historical data is like the best thing that we have available. And like I said, you can't magically think that anything is going to be immediately better or immediately worse. Everything else that changes those numbers that's in your control, right, are proactive things like your advertising, like your customer relations, like your quality of service, like your quality of product, protecting your unique selling point. Those are all on you, right? And that has nothing to do with the spreadsheet. Those are how you truly reflect in your operations what the numbers in the cells in the spreadsheet look like. So getting down to brass tacks, right? I criticize multivariable, regression. And if you're somebody who's very serious in the hospitality, or, you went to Cornell University, which has an, incredible program, right? You're used to collecting clean and large data sets. You might be working for an enterprise restaurant and you're like, yo, hey, don't talk down about these models, right? You guys are doing very complicated work, right? When you're like in the hotel hospitality like combo, you need to keep track of all of these variables because you're a very dynamic business. The unfortunate truth that I tell people, right, is, this business isn't mining coal, right, in terms of restaurant. Everybody says that it's so hard to make a buck, and, it is, but like I said, it's not mining coal. The flip side of it is that it's not rocket science either. If you're in a decent spot, if you provide decent service, and you can drive a little bit of volume, you should be able to survive and make some money. I think I talked about in my demo tool, right? The Toast says something like the national average for restaurant earnings is somewhere around $110,000 a month, as opposed to what I'd accidentally said in my demo. That's not bad, right? I mean, what is that, like, 1.2 million a year at 10%, profit margin, but you take into other considerations. I mean, it's not horrible, all things considered. People open restaurants because they do make money, right? If it didn't make money at all, nobody would be doing it. Operator, and kind of like opening your first restaurant, you don't need these kinds of full enterprise tools. They probably won't serve you because you don't have the customer base, you don't have the database, you don't have maybe necessarily the discipline to be recording 12 to 15 different variables, and you have no advertising budget. It's just you on social media. Not to mention, too, these tools can be time consuming, and they're technically consuming. By kind of modeling a more simple portion and growing the way that you analyze your business with your data set is really more important. And the most important function is actually doing it. We hear this all the time. It's like exercise and eating right and everything else. When you have a simpler tool, when you're a busy operator who may or may not have the technical expertise in things like Excel, or you don't have an MBA and you don't want to take night classes, and you don't need an MBA to run a restaurant, right? Having a simpler tool that functions directly, correlates directly to your needs for scheduling and getting these things done is the most important, and it's the most convenient. So that's part of what I think goes wrong with a lot of restaurant forecasting when it's done on the small operator level. I kind of have here in my notes, I talked about the OA business guys already. I have kind of the three stereotypes, and yes, I have to squint that hard to see my notes. There's different kinds of stereotypes and kind of archetypes, really, that you're going to see in the restaurant business, right? You've got the finance bros and all these guys coming in from like ex-corporate ventures, kind of like me, who use all this business speak and, have this very different idea of what restaurants should be and how they're measured and the paperwork and whatever, which, I'm more of an operations guy than anything. But unfortunately, you have to learn to speak legalese and finances at some point. The other stereotype, is the technophobic old timer, like we had talked about, all the paper, all the checks, the CPA. Those guys are still around, and I feel like one of the really fun things about restaurants these days is we have a generation coming up in the technology area, super saturated as far as technology goes, and social media. We still have people who grow up in restaurants with their parents running, who know how to handle the operations side, who know all this other stuff, but are now in this whole brand new world of technology and how they want to apply it. And I want to reemphasize, I'm not technophobic. I'm getting old. I'm 32, but I'm not that old, right? I think that a lot of old timers that are suspicious of technology, that's a great instinct to keep, to be cynical, to want to know how and why something applies to your business. I think scheduling applications, I think a lot of the information technology improves communication, formalizes policies that protect you on the HR and legal front, makes practices more fair when it's like more transparent that Dana has requested 3 days off, but she never, ever gets approved. So she always has to find shifts. It's like, all that's recorded and tracked, and you can go check in on those. The technology can simplify and improve quality of life for a lot of things than tacking up the old paper schedule or firing up the fax machine to send you very slow kinds of transmissions, right? The inverse of that now, though, is we are coming up in the age where we have people who are totally reliant. I'm going to call them, AI kids, right? But it's not just AI. It's social media. It's all this other stuff where people have this notion that, the business and the money and the forecasting will all come off of the backs and solutions of technology, or they don't have an expertise in something, so they're going to pawn it off on, tech. It's the answer, it's the solution, but, weirdly, the explanation, the logic of how it deploys, how it improves your check average, how it helps you drive guest count isn't quite there. And obviously I'm not a marketing guy. I'm sure somebody at their desk or, in their home right now is screaming at their phone, like, you can leverage $500 in advertising and make 10,000. Great. Keep doing it. I don't, I don't see it work for many people. And, restaurants have very specific places that they can be focusing and spending money on locally and controlling cost before they get to the marketing budget that are drastically going to improve their bottom line and their profitability. So one of the big things that gets missed, I think, in strategic planning by a lot of SMBs and looking at scheduling and scheduling dollars and training and stuff like that is an efficiency metric. And I think that's huge in realistic modeling and opening new revenue centers. And I think it's a huge strategic kind of consideration that often gets passed up. You have people who say like, oh, well, we just always have 3 servers on Friday. Like, so as concepts change, as your menu changes, the needs of your business change, service expectations might go up, a variety of things may occur that impact your staffing levels, your productivity, even your revenue mix, right? Like when we look at what I think is the benchmark for successful beverage programs is around 40% in gross sales and, up to about 70% gross profit, right? Now we're in a day and age where kids these days are drinking less, right? And more power to them, right? Whatever the health effects of alcohol, the societal thing just isn't there. Where I have friends just a couple years younger than me. They have 1 beer all day Friday. They're all night, all night accurately. 1 beer all night Friday, and they're happy. Great, I have from Chicago. I have a couple beers before leaving the house to go out on Friday. So world's difference, and so how is something like that impacting you, right? What does your cocktail program look like? What does your mocktail program look like? How is the staffing change? How is this changing consumer demand affecting your labor model, affecting your check average, affecting your product mixes? When you're not reacting to those things, when you even say, for example, I don't want to be part of a fad. No one wants you to be part of a fad, right? I don't like fads either. I think you should stay true to yourself, true to your concept, true to what you want to sell. But at the same time, when people want to pay you money and they want to pay you money because they enjoy your business, they enjoy your food, and they enjoy your company, the hospitality that you offer, I don't see a very good argument for not giving them something, right? Not giving them what they want. Meet the needs of your community and of your customers, right? And those changes are not across the board. Click here, 5 secret surprises to selling more mocktails, right? That stuff doesn't work. It's great for idea drafting. Maybe if you see enough of those articles, you think to yourself, you know what, damn it, it's time we put one on the menu. Fine, that's different. The top 5 things in the article don't translate to how your business is going to run. It doesn't translate to the recipes you're going to make or how your staff is going to prepare them and deliver them. So I think that just gives us a nice, strong starting point as an argument. We're always going to be having changing consumer demands. We're always going to be having changing fads and trends and everything. I mean, God, we have several going on, right? Like, despite drinking, high-end agave is still doing, I think, pretty well, judging by all the mezcal and tequila I see everywhere. We're getting on this whole protein maxing, fiber maxing, smaller bites, more affordable, I think everyone can understand, and those kinds of programs, those changes in price points and sales mixes, guess what? That's still part of your projection, right? So thank you for bearing with me so far. We'll call this episode 0 of a series where I'm just going to be kind of spitballing some fun topics and keeping them approachable to long form essay formats. This one's a little quick. This one's a little rambly. I will have some longer form video essays that are more organized. I think, something I'm going to link here that I'm very passionate about is interdisciplinary solutions for restaurants. Big hero of mine is Dr. Robert Sapolsky. There is a fantastic class that is offered at Stanford, which I think is still available on the Stanford Archives YouTube page, where, he has a book called like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And I think the title should tell you everything you need to know about it. He has this wide, multidisciplinary, scientific kind of philosophy, let's say. And so he looks at the gaps between genetic science, sociology, psychology, neuroscience, all these things. And, being as smart as he is, he understands what the explanations are in each of those fields for things like very complicated things like human behavior. And he kind of layers them alongside each other to form a more complete explanation of why people do, why societies do what they do. And yeah, it's just brilliant. And I love seeing the mixing and matching. And I'm a huge nerd. I'm going to be posting some videos about like game theory and consumer psychology and how those interact. And even talking about the game theory thing, talking about management principles with game theory, and incentivizing behavior. And yeah, it's going to be a wide variety of things, but I'm always going to try to pull it right back to how can you use these multidisciplinary solutions to improve things at your restaurant, to think about them a little bit. And yeah, let's call this episode 0. And thank you very much for joining me.